looking at it from more of the business side of things, do you think that DC moving forward should copy Marvel as they have done, or should they sort of do their own thing? I mean, part of the reason that DC has, I think, struggled in some ways is COVID, and obviously that's affected
all the industries.
That's affected everything, the entertainment industry especially, and streaming's been the big thing for the past 2 years. Is everybody's now have their own streaming services and they're just doing their own thing. I think in some way that's impacted DC. It's also helped because the Snyder Cut was released on HBO, and that's how people were able to see part of Zack Snyder's original idea for the Justice League and see how much the Whedon cut of the film differs and just how different the Whedon cut is compared to Snyder's original. So there are, I think, good, solid benefits to the streaming front as it is currently. I just have hesitation that DC should fully embrace how the business is currently operating at the moment. I mean, you look at Wonder Woman 84, the sequel to Wonder Woman, and obviously from a storytelling perspective, from a stylistic perspective, the film's different. It's the same character, but it's a little different style. But the other thing is that the film was released, in the midst of COVID shifting everything, and it was released in theaters, but also in streaming on the same day. And so I think streaming in a way has been competing with the traditional theater experience and the traditional way of film release. I don't know if that's something you would agree with. I don't think streaming is going anywhere. Looking at it from a studio perspective on how you make money from your audience members, I don't know if looking long term, if streaming is the way to go. Is that something that you would agree with? What are your thoughts on that?
Long-term short, streaming is pretty much going to be the future of anything entertainment. But also, at the same time, the complications and the complexities of how people view streaming, both as a positive and a negative, may also keep movie theaters in business, especially those that want the authentic experience. At the same time, it still needs to make money. And of course, not all the studios going to make money. For those that don't, well, we can give them another trial at Disney Plus or Max or Peacock or however other many streaming services we're on now. All in all, it will replace movie theaters for the most part, except for main event, top of the line films. So your Spider-Mans, your Avengers, your Justice Leagues, or Supermans and Batmans, those will potentially even end up in not just theaters, because as theaters close, because we saw this with the invention of the megaplex. When the megaplex started, it was mainly to cater to small theaters closing, like art houses. While they also became general theaters, they also closed and then became megaplexes. And at that point, now with streaming, the megaplexes are going to start becoming more mega, to the point where it may be arenas or even stadiums. And that's probably where the future of the cinematic experience will probably end up. It's probably going to be a supplementary viewing will be at, say, Dodger Stadium of all places. But for the general audience that doesn't want to deal with that, even though it's an event film, it can also debut on a streaming service. And thanks to their anti-piracy equipment and operations, it actually helps hinder piracy more than it actually helps, despite how popular belief says.
Yeah, and I agree. I think that venues, theaters are going to diminish. I don't think that the MCU in-game experience is going to go anywhere. And I think that's something that DC could capitalize on. And seeing a film in theaters and having an Avengers Endgame style audience impact there's no comparison. And I think if DC really does want to compete with Marvel, they have to get on that footing.
We talked about that before, and I'll say it again. Chase Marvel without chasing Marvel. You put up some temporary hits that are like solo films and whatever, but at the same time, you're building towards something greater.
And to bring this back to the animated shows that DC started off with, and I think what you're trying to get at is keeping it simple for the audience in terms of you can have multiverses of films that span different timelines, different characters, but
it just can't build to the greater product. Yeah, it has to be clipped off as just that.
Right, and the story throughout needs to be simple so that you can follow it and not have a convoluted plot line where you don't understand who this character is, how important they are to the story. Talking about it, again, looking at the early 2000s with DC's animated products, you can really see that in their what they produced with Bruce Timm's creative team. They had the same team of writers, same creative people, same voiceover talent, monitoring their actors coming in.
We made a very good series. I'm not bragging. I'm telling you after the fact that everybody put their heart and soul into it and worked together, and we succeeded in making a series that I'm so proud of.
Andrea knew what to say to get the actors to give the performance that she and the other people in the booth were expecting or envisioned.
There are different kinds of fights. You know, there's a difference between an and an ooh. So she would say, okay, now you're getting kicked in the stomach. You know, and she sees the storyboard. No, you're getting really kicked hard in the stomach. So, those are things that we would not be able to do unless we had, a wonderful captain at the helm, which she, was and is.
Comparing that with Marvel and DC, Marvel actually had a similar format where Kevin Feige wanted Marvel to have the same style throughout each film, regardless of who the director of the film was. He sat down and said, look, each film's going to have its own style to it, regardless of who's directing it, what the story is. You're going to know it's a Marvel movie. And DC, they never did that. And it's ironic because you can kind of see that again in their early releases with Batman, Superman, Batman Beyond, the Justice League, because it was the same creative team working on it. And so that's just my hope with James Gunn, is that he won't be heavily swayed by the studio, by the pressure to compete with Marvel, and he can just be the creative director. He can be the guy that oversees all the creative projects, and he can just craft the story he wants to tell with these characters and heroes, and he can deliver to the audience what the audience wants, which is a creative story.
Yeah, with Kevin Feige, of course. The thing about it, while yes, it is good to have someone uniformly behind the vision, like how George Lucas was with Star Wars and how James Gunn hopes to be with DC, at the same time, that person's not going to live forever, while the studios are going to want those franchises to survive forever. So at the same time, it's important to start diverting those specific visions and stuff to other people. That's why it's all discombobulated with DC. They tried it way too fast and way too hard, where to the point it was just a mess of ill-instructed lore, hero placements where it doesn't make any sense, to the point where people just became apathetic to it. Disney's making that same mistake with Star Wars. They had 3 separate directors were supposed to film 3 separate movies for the trilogy and apply their own style, yes, but at the same time create such a discombobulated vision that it did not make sense whatsoever half the time. Because at the same time, like, it had Snoke being introduced as the big bad, like how Star Wars was doing with the big bad being introduced in the beginning, and how Marvel was also doing that as well. But at the same time, it was also building up, and well, yes, theories and everything else also building up. They basically just killed him off like he was nothing. And it's like, wait, he was built up for a whole movie just for that? And that's the main thing that happened with Steppenwolf. That's the same thing that happened with, probably could have happened with Darkseid if that was done. It was a discombobulated mess. It lacked actual vision, and it was mainly just these are good franchises. Let's slap their names on it and call it a day. Well, yes, all these grips, production assistants, and of course producers are trying their best. At the same time, they have lore standards to live up to, and neither Star Wars nor DC has lived up to those.